Well, tonight is presented by the Community Civic Engagement Collaborative, which is a collaborative of folks from across Marci Park, Regent Park, Cabbagetown, and Corktown. We are all staff and residents who live and work in these neighborhoods who feel it necessary to participate in civic engagement in our city. And that means that we do things like voter engagement and different activities when it's not election time, things like deputing at council and talking about those processes. But also when it is election time, we do outreach and education around election issues and different voting issues. And we also run all candidates meetings, which is one of our favorite things to do. We have done a number of them all together, and we are really excited to be doing this one as well. I'm Denise, and I sit on the Community Civic Engagement Collaborative, and I am going to introduce you to our two moderators who will be the people who will help you. And if you have tech questions, you can put them in the chat, and I will sort out tech questions as we go. And then there'll some other instructions will come from our two moderators, Dai and Sebastian. And I will let them introduce themselves and take it away from there.
My name is Marci Ien. I use she and the pronouns, and I'll be helping moderate tonight's debate. So super excited, see a lot of folks that I know. Hello to everyone that I know. I work at the St. Jamestown Community Corner as a COVID vaccine ambassador at the moment, and I have a long history in housing organizing and just social justice, general grassroots organizing. I've been very politically engaged from a young age. I'm excited to see this coalition of community workers and social service providers in Toronto Centre come together to help folks in the neighborhood vote for the best candidate that represents their interests the most. So super excited to see tonight play out, and thank you all for being here. And I'll let Dime go now.
Yeah, my name is Dai Muhammad. I am 19. I use he, him pronouns, and I've lived in Regent Park since I was 2, so basically my whole life. I've worked in and around the community with a bunch of different organizations. I was with YSM. I saw Julian in here. This past summer, I was with Focus Media Arts, and that's actually how I got here. And at Focus, I actually got some great opportunities to talk to some of the candidates as well. And I'm really excited to see what happens tonight, see the productive conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Sebastian, if you want to take it away with our land acknowledgement.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to acknowledge that Toronto is built upon the traditional lands of the Mississauga, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Huron, and many other Indigenous peoples, and that these peoples have been the stewards of the land in what is now known as Toronto and across Turtle Island for thousands of years. It's important to acknowledge the history of the lands that we are on, to stop and think about how the lands that we use today have supported and nourished other nations, other peoples, before we came and frankly colonized them and stole them. We must acknowledge that we now benefit from the land and how we may continue to respect the histories and steward the land. The understanding and acknowledgement of the peoples that came before us is particularly relevant here in the downtown east, as it has been home to Indigenous peoples from time immemorial. But it has also been home to waves of tight-knit communities for more than 100 years. Our history includes multiple efforts to tear down and rebuild, with each iteration of the neighborhood washing away the connections to the people's lives and communities that were here before. This is a structure of colonialism and continues to be perpetuated today against folks in many neighborhoods in Toronto Centre. As a richly diverse community, displacement is something that many in Toronto Centre feel deeply as part of the history of the land and part of their own history as newcomers, descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, and other forms of imperialism, and as community members that have called the downtown east side home. I would also like to acknowledge that the federal election taking place is for a colonial government, and many people will make the choice to vote, and many will make the choice to not vote and or not vote for the candidates that they are offered, and both are equally valid in relationship to navigating colonialism. As many candidates make tough choices to run for the colonial government, even with past histories of being on the receiving end of a lot of harm by this government, I commend the candidates who make that choice. And I do ask that whoever ends up winning this election for this seat to understand that your position will never override or supersede the positions of Indigenous nations who are on unceded territory and on sovereign territory as sovereign Indigenous peoples. Thank you so much, and let's take it away.
Yeah, and before we get started, I actually wanted to provide a social contract for the attendees as well. The Civic Engagement Collaborative, in partnership with Corktown BIA, are dedicated to hosting a harassment-free and safe event for everyone, regardless of race, religion, gender, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, disability, age, or physical appearance. Everybody is welcome. As this event is going to be held virtually, I have a few requests as well. This is a community event to encourage civic engagement within our community. We hope to create a safe space to understand the platforms of the parties present. Please help us by setting an example of respect and inclusivity and showcasing the values of our community. Please help us ensure the accessibility for all attendees by remaining silent during the proceedings when the candidates are speaking. We reserve the right to mute participants as well. We want to ensure that everyone is able to hear what is going on. As I said, please remain on mute throughout the event. Please put questions in the chat and start your questions with an asterisk, the Shift 8 thing. If your question is selected, you'll be called upon to unmute, and you'll have 1 minute to ask your question. Please don't display any anti-party slogans or placards of offensive nature on your display screen. Booing of candidates and typing offensive and abusive languages in the online chat will be moderated. Feel free to share your thoughts in the chat in a constructive way. We encourage you to engage in active listening. We also encourage you to suspend judgment for today. If poor behavior is displayed, moderators will issue a warning to you. If a second instance arises, the participant will be removed from the event for the remainder of the event, which, by the way, if you are removed, you can watch on Regent Park Focus's YouTube. The CCEC team will be monitoring the chat, and we're hoping to have an issue-free event. We appreciate your participation. And for the candidates, this event is about stating your position on the issues that matter to your constituents, not about taking shots at your running mates. Please be mindful of this throughout the event. We have zero tolerance for abusive, racist, sexist, homophobic, and other types of oppressive language. Candidates may disagree with one another, but you have to be respectful. Candidates will only be warned once and removed on second offense of abusive comments. Once removed, candidates will not be allowed back in the event. Candidates will be verbally warned for any aggressive language or tone. You must respect the moderators and our timelines. We have very strict guidelines on timing as well. The mute function can be used if timing is not respected. The CCEC team will be monitoring the room to ensure participants are respecting each other and the candidates. Participants will be removed for abusive, heckling, aggressive language or tone.
All right, so just a second. So we'll be doing the order of speakers and then inviting the candidates to start their intros according to this order. So we have Annamie Paul from the Green Party, who will be assigned the letter A and who will be the first person to do their intro. Brian Chang from the NDP will be assigned the letter B and will be the second person to do his intro. Marci Ien from the Liberal Party will be the third person to do their intro, and she has the letter C. And then Ryan Lester from the Conservative Party, who will be assigned the letter D, will be the fourth and final person to do his intro tonight. So go ahead, Annamie.
Hello, good timing. I'm just got this setup done for being with you, and just in the nick of time. Very good to be with you. I am here today actually on the traditional territories of the Mi'kmaq, out on the island of Prince Edward Island. For those of you who haven't been here, it's quite beautiful. But not as close to my heart as Toronto Centre. And it's so wonderful to see so many community friends that I've had the chance to see and meet and speak with lately. Just very simply put, I am running again to represent you because I'm seeking to offer you a real representation focused on the needs of the community, one that understands that there is a great deal of unfinished work to be done to ensure that people can live with dignity within the community, to ensure that we emerge from the pandemic stronger than when we headed into it. And because it's a community, again, that gave me a start that I want to make sure that every person who lives in the community can have. And I know that you are the people driving that. I know that you are the people that have the best ideas on how to do that. And my job is to support you and to help unlock those resources for you. So, I give you a hug from out here in PEI. Can't wait to see you in a couple of days. And as some of you know, we're already working with you. I'm excited to continue working for you if you give me that opportunity. Thank you so much.
I will apologize to the candidates that I have a timer for you. I will get it going. I accidentally hit the back button, kick the timer out. So I will get that going for you in just a second. And the next person can go ahead and I should have it up before the end.
Yeah, Brian, 3 minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Chang. I am the NDP candidate here in Toronto Centre, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm so happy to be with everyone tonight and really excited to chat with you all. It's been a fantastic, short little campaign out here in the riding that we all live in, and trying to fight for the things that are really important. And that's what Jagmeet Singh and I are bringing to the table this time around. In 2019, when I ran for the first time, it was important for me to step up and tell the story of what it was like to be a queer Chinese Jamaican disabled person who was running for office here in Toronto Centre. And it was important for me because there were so many reasons why we needed to have change at the federal level of government. I know what it's like to have $30,000 in debt. I know what it's like to work endless cycles of contract after contract after contract. As a freelance journalist working in arts in the city of Toronto, I was being paid 1 penny for every word. And I would write 1,000 words and I would spend days at that. And I would wait 5 to 6 months to get paid for some of this work. I would start one contract. It would be extended for a month. It would be extended for 30 days. It would then be canceled. And it was so challenging. And then I had to look at the environment. I have known that the climate emergency, the greenhouse gas effect, that these are issues that have been around since I was a child. And it was one of the reasons why I decided to get involved in the environment. I did my undergrad in environmental policy and practice and political science. And then I did my master's in environmental studies. Through that time, I worked at Greenpeace and I helped fight against the refurbishment of the Pickering nuclear generating station. I fought against the clear cutting of old growth forest in Northern Ontario. And it's really troubling to me that it's 2021 and over half of my life has passed since I started getting involved in climate action. And we have seen nothing but our greenhouse gas emissions go up time and time again. If we want to look at affordable housing, just the sheer amount that it costs to live in our communities. I'm tired of seeing friends leave the downtown core, leave the village, leave Regent Park, leave Corktown because they can no longer afford to live down here. And the federal government can't take action. We've seen what that looks like over the course of the pandemic, with programs like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Originally $1,000, New Democrats fought for it to be $2,000. Just think about the amount of people that you know who were personally impacted by these programs. And when times were tough, we didn't turn to big corporations like Amazon or Canadian Tire or Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment to help out. It was our public services and our government that we turned to. So we must invest in our public services, universal healthcare, tackling the climate emergency, making sure we're tackling and taking care of our commitments to truth and reconciliation, Indigenous peoples. Over the course of the next 2 hours, I look forward to chatting with all of you and hearing your questions and answering them. Thanks so much for being here.
For candidates, if you'd like to pin Blue Sky Timer to your screen, that'll be your timer for the rest of the evening, and I will not hit the back button.
I guess Marci, go ahead. 3 minutes.
Thanks so much, Diane. It is a pleasure to be with all of you here tonight, and I love the engagement especially the youth that are so engaged and active in community. I've got to tell you, and I will just tell you a little bit about my story. I'm a Liberal candidate for Toronto Centre. And if you had asked me a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, told me that I'd be sitting here right now and that I would have served Toronto Centre as the MP for some 10 months, I would have told you that you were completely crazy. I was a journalist for almost 30 years, and I was the one asking the questions and actually putting politicians to the test with those questions. And, you know, it was looking at systemic racism, in particular, the killing of George Floyd, that I thought, I can't sit here and talk about this from my talk show perch. I've got to do something about it. And it's the reason that I ran. And I ran in Toronto Centre because it's where my family's story began. My parents emigrated from Trinidad some 60 years ago, and they had a better life, and they did that, and they sacrificed to do that. They came here with absolutely nothing. But I'll tell you, they taught me how to be strong. They taught me how to be gritty. My entire career, I have been an only. I was the first Black woman in this country to host a morning show. I was an only in a newsroom, and I was constantly pushing for stories about people that look like me, racialized communities, because in our newsrooms across this country, they weren't being told. And I pushed and I fought and I told them. And so now, in this position, on the ground, talking to people that live in our communities, agencies, everybody that makes Toronto Centre tick has been the honor of my life. The difference now is that instead of talking about these things and pushing news editors to move on these things, I get to take action. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to the next couple hours with you.
Awesome. And Ryan, 3 minutes.
Okay, thanks so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight. I'm Ryan Lester, excuse me, your Conservative candidate for Toronto Centre. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm excited to be running on Canada's recovery plan to secure the future. First, let me acknowledge the deep sorrow and mourning that all Indigenous peoples and survivors of residential schools are experiencing. Our hearts grieve for the Indigenous communities who are sharing in this trauma. Canada's Conservatives have long called for a specific timeline and a budget to deliver on the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. I'm sure we'll talk more about this important issue later tonight, and I look forward to contrasting the difference between the Liberals' lack of meaningful action over the last 6 years and our plan to really improve the lives of Indigenous peoples across Canada. I've lived in this riding with my husband for 10 years, along with our dog Meatball for 7 years, currently just down the street from Regent Park at Dundas and Jarvis. I'm passionate about human rights and equality. I've been a director at Egal Canada Human Rights Trust and the Canadian Centre for Diversity Inclusion, and I've served as treasurer at the AIDS Committee of Toronto. This riding is no stranger to federal elections. It's the third time you've been asked to go to the polls in as many years. I was your candidate in 2019, alongside the same slate of candidates who are running in this election, except for Bill Morneau, who experienced too many ethics and conflict of interest violations and had to resign as Minister of Finance and the MP for this riding. After the 2019 election, the resignation of Bill Morneau triggered a pandemic by-election in this riding last year. And now the Prime Minister has made his decision to call this election during the fourth wave of the pandemic, killing all the important bills that were working their way through the House of Commons. People in Regent Park have told me that what is really on your minds is your health, the health of your friends and family, and whether you will have a job in the coming weeks and months. You are starting to notice that the price of everything is going up, caused by Liberal inflation. So I'm happy to tell you that you can take comfort in knowing that Canada's Conservatives have a plan. It's called our Plan for Canada's Recovery. It's a good plan, and it was released at the start of this election, so you can hold us accountable. As an LGBTQ candidate in this election, I'm proud to bring my lived experience to Canada's Conservatives, and I look forward to fighting for an end to the blood ban, which currently prevents gay and bisexual men from donating blood products, and organs. I also look forward to fighting to end LGBTQ2 conversion practices, also referred to as conversion therapy in this country. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion together tonight.
All right, thank you so much. And we are going to get into the questions. Before I do ask the questions, though, I want to let every one of the attendees know that we are taking questions from you guys. Just put them in the chat, and if you can't put them in the chat, feel free to raise your hand. We'd love to hear your input. First, we are going to start with a question from a community member, and I'll read it out for you. Rent control has not been properly implemented in my area, St. Jamestown, for the last 20 years that I've been living there. The rent keeps increasing every year. This is also a concern of many of my neighbors. So that's the prompt. And Brian, we're going to have you start.
Thanks so much for that question. I think it's really important. This is a community of renters, and we're seeing this, even though the only thing that's being built down here right now is private condominiums. What's really important is that we are building a variety of different types of housing, including purpose-built rentals, including making sure that we are building co-ops and investing in different types of communities. But for renters right now, what I can tell you is that New Democrats are committed to a renter's benefit. And what that means is because of the pandemic, many of us have gotten behind on payments. Many of us are seeing a lot of debt. But what we want to provide is a bridging for you to be able to maintain your home where you're at, so you're not at a crisis in which you've lost access to your home and then you need to search for new housing. So our renter benefit will provide up to $5,000 for renters who are seeing a difficult time making ends meet, because it's so much easier to keep you in the home that you're at. It's healthier for you, it's healthier for our communities, and it's better for everybody. And this isn't just a program that we're implementing in terms of just for the pandemic. We're actually interested in keeping this program permanently, so that in the event that you need access to a benefit to stay in the home that you're at, you can rely on New Democrats and up to $5,000 to help you stay in that home. Thank you.
Hey, and just before we continue, I do want to add that this question was provided by a Filipino member of the community. Next up, we've got Marci.
Thanks, Dan. I'm just unmuting. And thank you so much for the question. During the by-election, so many people, specifically in Regent Park, talked to me about renting, but it wasn't just renting, it was wanting to own. It was ownership. And we talked about generational wealth. We talked about wanting to pass real estate, something that they own, to their children. How do they do that? Racialized communities in particular don't own as much as other communities in our country, and specifically in Toronto Centre. I took that back to caucus, and part of our plan in Budget 2021, part of our election platform, contains a rent-to-own strategy. What does that mean? It means that you can work with your landlord and within 5 years own the property that you are now renting. And so I am happy to talk about renters who told me that through CERB and other assistance, they were able to keep their places through the pandemic, and we're very thankful for that. But the thing that I like to talk to most is ownership, because that's where generational wealth happens. That's where families get stronger. That's where parents can hand something down to their kids and future generations thrive. So very proud of the fact that in the 9-10 months that I was the MP of Toronto Centre, rent to own was something that I fought for and is now part of our platform. And thanks so much for the question.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your answer. Ryan, you're up next.
Thank you. The Liberal housing strategy is broken and unproductive. And this is despite their commitment of over $70 billion. Despite all that money, we still find ourselves in a housing crisis. They've had 6 years to put together a plan and to start to deliver on the crisis that we find ourselves in. And part of the problem is that the success of a federal housing strategy cannot be defined by the number of tax dollars that are committed or spent. It's got to be defined by the number of Canadians who are able to find access to the home that they need. That's why Canada's recovery plan will make homes more affordable for owners as well as renters. We're not building enough homes and rental units to keep up with Canada's growing population, which is a big part of why homes are getting harder and harder for Canadians to afford. So as part of our plan, we will implement our plan to build 1 million homes in the next 3 years, and we're going to build more homes near publicly funded transit. We want to provide Canadians with a path to home ownership by making it easier for more families to get a mortgage. And we want to address the soaring cost of renting a home by partnering with municipalities and the private sector to bring new rental units into the market. Lastly, we'll be a reliable partner in addressing the housing needs of Indigenous communities and implement a for Indigenous by Indigenous housing strategy in the spirit of reconciliation.
Okay, and so thank you so much. And to round out our big four, Annamie?
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the question. And it's really one I have to say is certainly in the top two when I go around Toronto Centre speaking to people from all across. Toronto Centre is a community of renters. We have over 80% of the people in our community renting. It is one of the least affordable places to rent in the entire country. And the strategies that have been proposed at the federal level simply do not respond to the needs of a community like ours. When you talk about creating access to home ownership by boosting the amount of money that you can put aside toward a down payment for places that are $500,000 or $700,000, it's just simply not enough money. Most people don't earn enough money for that ever to be a reality for them. During the pandemic, we tried to get people real help when they needed it based on what we were hearing in the community. We called for all parties to come together to join us in creating a residential tenant support benefit during the pandemic, one that would recognize that people are falling further and further behind in their rent during the pandemic and are risking eviction, one that would get them help in real time when they need it. And we did invite all the other parties to join us. None of them did. And we still have thousands of families in Toronto Centre that are at risk of eviction. We have to get back to basics. We knew and know what we need to do. We just need the political will to do it. And those are things like purpose-built rental housing units, affordable housing units, co-op housing units, community supportive housing. Toronto Centre was actually a global model for how you build that kind of housing and create vibrant mixed income communities. We need a federal partner that's going to help us to get back to those roots. It's really about building those roots.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. That was a very great first round of questions. We are looking at getting a question from a community member first. We're just waiting on a response from him. Let's just give it like 17 seconds.
I'm just going to call him out. Waleed, the next question is the question on community benefits. Is it a question that you want to ask, or would you like us to ask it?
Sure, I can quickly ask. So I think I posted it up on the chat, and it's specifically to, I guess, to all the candidates. The federal government is an integral partner in the revitalization efforts for phase 4 and 5. The Regent Park Neighbourhood Association is calling on all candidates to support a trilateral community benefits agreement between the Regent Park Neighbourhood Association, Tridel, and TCHC. Do you support the community call by the Regent Park Neighbourhood Association?
Okay, and we are going to start with Marci.
Hi again, just unmuting, and thanks so much for the question, Waleed. Waleed, as you know, and the association knows, our office has been by your side throughout this process. We will continue to do that. We have attended meetings. If I'm not there, a member of my team is there We have been fully involved and will continue to be involved in this process that is so important for the community. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Ryan, next.
Thanks, Waleed, for the question. And I really appreciate the work that you and others...
Ryan.
Apologies.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. I mean, if you're frustrated by not getting anywhere with this federal government over the last 6 years, when it comes to partnerships, when it comes to housing, when it comes to all kinds of promises that have been made in elections past, and for quite a few of them now, adding up, you're not alone. I think everyone here tonight has a lot of expectation, given the fact that promises have been made to us over past federal elections, and none of them have come through. I mean, if you're looking for a federal partner to advance any of the conversations we're having here tonight, you can look to Canada's Conservatives. Marci Ien and Justin Trudeau have had 6 years to attend all the meetings that they've been invited to and to take your issues seriously. And all you have to do is look around, look out your window, down to the street, and ask yourself, is this the kind of progress that you thought you were going to get when you voted Liberal in the last election? It's not what I thought I was going to get. There are a number of promises that are important to me, like I know they are important to you, including this important project at Regent Park, but others that have really just been thrown to the wayside. You can go back as far as 2015, when the Prime Minister rolled out quite an impressive cart of promises and then promptly abandoned nearly all of them. So ask yourself, if you've had a list of things you want the federal government do, this federal government has had 6 years to do it. 4 years in a majority mandate and 2 years where Canadians sent a minority mandate, wanting the Prime Minister and Marci Ien to work together with all the other parties to collaborate and to find consensus to move things forward. Instead, what we've seen him do is call an election that nobody wants, so he could try to get the majority that he lost in 2019. So if you want change, you want real change, and someone to deliver on the promises that we make, it's Canada's Conservatives.
Thank you so much for your answer and all the criticism. Next, we have the Greens. Annamie?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. And it's been, for those of you who are part of the Regent Park Neighborhood Association or the coalition, you'll know that we've been there at the meetings, not just at the meetings. I mean, the people who are Greens, many of you, and I see some of the faces on the screen, you know the people, we live in the community, they're working in the community, they work with associations in the community, they're activists in the community. And so of course we support it. I mean, I will say, I heard that there was going to be more listening, but I didn't hear that there would be a sign on. In our case, I can say unequivocally that we would support that trilateral arrangement. And the reason that we would is that I think we're all tired of plans that are developed by other people being imposed upon communities. There is simply no one who knows as much about what Regent Park needs and how to unlock the potential of one of the last, perhaps greatest economic investments in the community than you all do. And so having your perspective at the table and also having you have a say at the table is so incredibly important. And so of course we support that. And maybe just to pick up on something that Ryan said, one of the big things going into the next parliament is going to be whether people are going to be able to look beyond their partisan interests towards working together to help communities that need it the most. I mentioned this benefit that we proposed because it was a great idea. It was proposed by a national housing coalition. It wasn't even our idea. They warned that there's a big wave of evictions coming because the pandemic has put people into a very difficult situation. It was a hole that needed to be filled to protect people in housing. And when we asked for that cross-partisan support and for the government to support it, they didn't do it. And so you need to send people back to Ottawa that are really focused on the community before their political parties.
Okay, thank you so much. And now, Brian.
I think I'm in the right place now.
Yeah.
Waleed, thank you for the question. And as I was saying, the work that you've been doing around community benefits is great. And I think that this is so important for the community. But what I'm hearing from you is that you actually want a solid commitment to different numbers. And it's not just an overall commitment to community benefit agreements, but actually making sure that there are jobs, that there is a commitment to home ownership. There's a commitment to making sure that there's local procurement. All of these components of what you've put together is actually very essential to, I believe, what will be the Block 4 and Block 5 development. There will be new developments and new relationships that are required with us as and the community as a new developer has been brought on board. But that's work that we can do absolutely with every level. I have a great working relationship with Kristen Wong Tam, who's a city councillor for the area. I have a great working relationship with NDP MPP Suze Morrison, who is also the representative for the area. And I would work with their offices to make sure that a community benefits agreement for Regent Park reflects what the community needs and what the community actually wants. And further to that, it's about the conversations that I've had, and I had one with Tanvir about the fact that there's actually no office space now in Regent Park. And I was actually thinking about the ways in which, like, even if you wanted to open up something locally and do that work, with the loss of CSI, which is still hitting me pretty hard as somebody who used to work there back when it opened, was that we need to be making sure that there are many different types of spaces that are part of the Regent Park community, and not just the Regent Park community, but many others, to make sure that there are a variety of spaces that can meet the needs, the economic needs, the job growth needs, the community needs, the music needs, the arts needs, and the community space for all of us, so that we can, so that people in Regent Park have access to what they need in order to be successful. And you can be sure that I will be at those tables, and I will work with you to make sure that these agreements benefit the community. And the last thing I'll say, there must be an anti-racist approach to these. We've seen the issues with nooses on construction sites in Regent Park, so we must make sure we're working with our allies to ensure that these are anti-racist workplaces. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much. And now I will hand it over to my co-moderator, Sebastian.
Yes, thank you for handing that over. We have a question in the chat, which we got from Waleed's list of questions. So this question from community is with regards to the opioid crisis. What steps will you take to ensure that our federal government takes action regarding the overdose pandemic? The number of homeless people who died of opioid overdoses more than doubled during the pandemic to 323 deaths from 135 deaths in the same period the year before. What steps will you take when elected to address this challenge? So the first person to answer this, I am going to pass it off to Ryan Lester for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. This is an important issue, I know, for everyone in Toronto Centre. And I know that mental health and the way that it intersects with addiction is on our front porches, it's on our sidewalks, it's in our parks. And so we are compassionate and caring riding. We want to see more action when it comes to the opioid crisis. I'm excited by Aaron O'Toole's plan to invest $325 million over the next 3 years to create 1,000 residential drug treatment beds and build 50 recovery community centers across this country. People need a roof over their head and they need access to treatment if we're ever going to start solving this problem. I'm also excited about our plan to re-implement the housing first approach, which has been watered down by the current federal government to aid in the fight against Canada's addiction crisis. We also want to revise the federal government's substance abuse policy framework to make recovery its overarching goal. And we want to support innovative approaches to address the crisis of mental health challenges and addiction, such as land-based treatment programs developed and managed by Indigenous communities, as part of a plan to enhance the delivery of culturally appropriate addictions treatment and prevention services in First Nations communities with high needs. And lastly, I'll just say that part of my work at EGAL Canada Human Rights Trust was to work on a first of its kind for this riding right down the street between where I live and Regent Park. It's called EGAL Centre at that time, with a very specific focus on providing housing and access to treatment programs for addiction and mental health that was specifically dedicated to LGBTQ2 youth in this city. So I'd like to see more partnerships with charities and not-for-profit organizations on the ground who really understand and are able to pivot and deliver on the kinds of services that we know we need. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we will have Annamie for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the question. I mean, for me, I have to say it's one of these things that causes me, I mean, the anguish is sometimes unbearable because you walk through the community and you see your neighbors suffering and you read the statistics and you know that many of the deaths that have happened are happening in an avoidable way because the action that should be taken has not been taken. It's just that simple. Sometimes you have problems without solutions, but this is not one of those things. And speaking to many different community organizations and associations, this also we have heard that the pandemic has been particularly hard on racialized people, on marginalized people, that there has been a spike in drug use, there has been a spike in drug poisonings, and it is absolutely raging through our community. So the solutions have existed for a very long time. There is a huge consensus amongst healthcare advocates, coroners, chiefs of police, people who have lost their loved ones about what we need to do. We need to decriminalize to end the stigma. We need to create a national safe supply program of drugs of choice so that people who are using know that what they're using is safe. And then we need wraparound services. We need community supportive housing, mental health care services, employment services, all of the wraparound care that allows people to again deal with their drug use and also at the same time have the supports that they need to do that. We invited again every party to join us in doing those two things before Canada Day because nothing is left but to do it. And we are losing 17 people a day on average in Canada because we haven't done it. Not one single party responded to our call to decriminalize and create that national safe supply. We need more solidarity in Parliament.
Thank you. Brian Chang will go next for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. This is a major national public health emergency. We attempted to get this declared a national public health emergency in 2018, and we attempted to work to make sure that this was on the front of mind for the Liberal government and governments since then. There's so much that we need to do, and New Democrats are thinking about this in a long-term way. It's not just about what do we do in terms of band-aids. And I'll give you the example right now that we're seeing with the clearing of encampments, and many of these people are drug users. Only 8% of these people have actually been housed over this time, and that's simply unacceptable for the sheer cost of the over-policing. So this is an issue of policing, and we cannot incarcerate ourselves out of this problem. So New Democrats are talking about decriminalization. We are talking about safe supply. We are talking about making sure that we're coming to the table in our communities to meet the needs. We're talking about safe consumption sites. We're talking about having these difficult conversations because we need to make sure that rehabilitation is part of our public healthcare system, that people have access to the needs if they want to get off of drug use. But we have to acknowledge and recognize that drug use is not necessarily, it is a choice in many cases, but it is not a choice in many other cases. And we have to meet people's needs wherever they are. There's so much that's involved, but what it actually requires us to do is actually treat this as a national public health emergency, because this is an issue from here. It's an issue in Timmins. It's an issue in London, Ontario. It's an issue in the downtown Vancouver East Side. It's an issue in Montreal. There is no place across this country that is not being touched by the opioid crisis. So we must be confronting this at a national level, and that requires federal leadership to really, truly take us out of this crisis. We didn't get here overnight, and it's going to take us a while to get there, but we must implement those plans now. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you for the answer. And lastly, I would like to hear from Marci Ien for 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Sebastian. Appreciate that. There are a couple of things here. I want to start with the opioid crisis first, because a re-elected Liberal government is looking at $25 million for public education to end the stigma, which is important, and support evidence-based treatments, which is also important, and introduce a comprehensive strategy to end the opioid crisis, which is also important. This last 19 months of a pandemic has given us many lessons. And one of the lessons is that we have understood and learned who has been left behind, who has been disproportionately impacted. And it has mostly been racialized communities. Mental health is so very important, and we are addressing it as a government. A re-elected Liberal government is looking at health transfers in the neighborhood of $4.5 billion over 5 years, specifically for mental health to provinces and territories. What does that mean? We have a youth councillor while I was MP, and the number one thing that I heard from the young people that I chatted with, was about mental health and how they were suffering. I contacted CAMH, which is just outside of our riding, to see if we could do something locally. Could they help? Could we have something localized, because they have some of the best expertise in the world to deal with this mental health crisis. The woman that I spoke to there thanked me for calling, and she also said that for young people in particular, that rates of suicide attempts, mental health emergencies hadn't doubled, but tripled during this time. And so we are working together on that. Wraparound services. We have a couple of rapid housing initiatives happening in Toronto Centre, and what I would like to see is services within them, so that while we're housing people, housing our neighbors, we're also including places that can treat them. Because there's no use housing people that are in mental health emergencies and not giving them the treatment in order
you're over
to
by
thrive.
30 seconds.
Ooh, I'm so sorry. Sorry about that. Being quiet now. Sorry.
Okay, well, thank you for all those answers. And yeah, I mean, just always keep in time, but of course, you know, we won't try and be too mean about that. So the next question, I do see that Purnima has had their hand up for quite a while. So does Purnima want to ask their question?
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm really so happy to see all of you. Well, first of all, I'm Purnima. I'm from Regent Park. And honestly, I'm so happy to be here and see all those honorable candidates and really honored. I'm really honored to have the chance to talk today's night. Thank you so much. So this September 20th, I am going to vote for second time. So I'm really excited. But before taking my final decision, yes, for sure, I need to ask all of you a burning question, for sure. So do you support changing the Canada Labour Code to enact at least 10 permanent employer-paid sick days each year? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that question, Purnima. So we're going to start with Annamie Paul. Go ahead. Floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Thank you. And yes, we support very much paid sick leave. You know, my grandma was a personal support worker in Toronto Centre. You know, she'd been a nurse back home, couldn't qualify here. She came in her 50s. It was too long to completely retrain to become a nurse. So she became a personal support worker because that's the work that she loved. She, you know, my mom she told me this actually not that long ago, that there were years that my grandma went to work every single day in debilitating back pain because she had pulled her back at work and it had never healed properly. And she still had to go in because if she didn't go in, she didn't get paid. And she did that for years. And we know that during the pandemic that there were many people in the community that went out to work in dangerous conditions, worried about bringing sick sometimes themselves because they didn't have that paid sick leave. And so absolutely we should have it. All of these things, again, are questions of priorities because we have all the evidence we need about the difference that these things would make in people's lives, in the health of communities, and just in the dignity of doing work. But they have not been made a priority because they are issues for, low income people, for marginalized communities, for racialized communities, from communities like ours who have not been prioritized for decades. And that's really the thing again. I mean, I think it's important to keep the tone of our discussion elevated, but I don't think that holding a government accountable is lowering the tone. And when we look at our situation and we see that there are more people living in poverty, more people living in inadequate housing, more crime in our neighborhoods, less of the supports that people need after all of this time, then we have to say why, and people have to have the courage to make a change. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you for that answer. So next, Brian for 2 minutes, Brian Chang.
Thank you so much for the full name, Sebastian. I really appreciate it. Purnima, thank you so much for the question. Absolutely, yes, we are committed to amending the labor code to ensure that 10 days of paid sick leave are included for all Canadians right across the country. But that's just for federally regulated industries. We will, of course, work with the provinces to expand that beyond. I work as a research associate at SEIU Healthcare. We represent 60,000 healthcare workers right across the province, and the majority of our workers are actually long-term care homes and retirement homes. So PSWs and RPNs who have been suffering over the course of the pandemic are people that I have fought for every single day over the course of the last 2 years. And what's so important is that these are workers who should have had the right to paid sick leave. We're seeing for-profit employers try to take their sick leave and cut it with concessions, try to remove that, try to lower their entitlement. We must do better, and it is our governments that must stand up and make sure that that happens. And New Democrats have been very clear about this time and time again over the course of the pandemic, that 10 days is the minimum that we should be asking for. Now, in terms of what that means beyond, we're also talking about expanding EI. So for people who are experiencing episodic disabilities, such as multiple sclerosis, if there are days in which they cannot work, we will work with the Sickness EI program to make sure that there is coverage, even if you need 1 day or 2 days because of an episodic disability. Do not worry. We want to work with the system to make sure that that is available to you. We want to make sure that sickness benefits are now expanded up to 50 weeks, so that in the event that people are dealing with the results of long COVID, that you can have that protection and know that you will have money that you can rely on. New Democrats are also committed to making sure that the EI system provides no less than $500 a week to people who are accessing the EI system. There's so much that New Democrats can do, but I can tell you that we are committed to making sure that people do not have to go to work sick, because that is absolutely wrong. And during a pandemic, it is bizarre that we have not learned that lesson and governments have not implemented these plans yet. Thank you so much for the question, Purnima.
Great, thank you, Brian. And next, Marci for 2 minutes.
Sebastian, thank you. And I will make sure to keep to time. Purnima, thank you so much for this important question. And the answer is an unequivocal yes. 10 paid sick days. As well, want to add that more and more we are looking at a gig economy. Gone are the days where people have a job for 25 years and retire with pension. And so we have seen that, and we are introducing EI for gig workers as well. So Purnima, yes to your question, and happy voting.
Thank you. That was very brief. So last, we'll go with Ryan Lester. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Purnima, for the question. The message here for us is that Canadian workers and their families should know that we have their back if they become seriously ill. With Canada's recovery plan, Canada's Conservatives will ensure that workers who need to take sick leave receive adequate financial support to recover and support their families by increasing EI sickness benefits from 26 weeks to 52 weeks for people who are sick. So this will go beyond the federally regulated industries and provide more sickness benefits to more people. The current EI sickness benefit limit of 26 weeks is just not enough for those who are undergoing treatments for serious illnesses like long COVID or like cancer. This needs to change. It's time for the government to stand up for workers and for their health. Canada's recovery plan will put working Canadians at the front of their recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for the questions. Now I'm going to pass it off to Diane to ask the next question.
Yeah, and this next question is actually from the chat. So I'm right now going to invite Cashton Fitzsimons. Sorry if I ruined your name there. But...
Oh, you said it perfectly.
Oh, great.
Most people, I've been called all sorts of things. That was very nice. Thank you.
Awesome.
So really just briefly, of course, thousands of people, young and old in Toronto Centre are post-secondary students. And for many people, a post-secondary education is a requirement to pursue their preferred career path or to get stable employment. For many students studying in Toronto, however, this means taking on tens of thousands of dollars in debt. Should post-secondary education be offered tuition-free? If yes, what would that look like? And if not, why is that? Thanks.
All right, and so first off, we are going to start with Brian Chang.
Thanks so much for the question, Cashton. I think that post-secondary education is an absolute right. Education is a right, and we should be making sure that it's available to all Canadians. New Democrats will work towards making sure that post-secondary education is part of our public education system. And we want that to mean that people who qualify should be able to go to post-secondary education tuition-free. That will require work, and it is something that we will absolutely work towards. I was on the University of Toronto Students' Union when I was doing my undergrad. I was also on the Graduate Environmental Studies Student Association, which was part of the Graduate Students Association at York University. It was a lot of letters. But all through that time, I have fought for tuition fees to be lowered. I fought against the deregulation of tuition fees, and I have stood in support of international students. And I think that this discussion about post-secondary education must include a discussion about international students and the way the post-secondary education, post-secondary institutions in Canada are using them as pure investments. The deregulation of international students is actually harming people who are coming to this country to get an education. There's no guarantee they can stay in the country after they have received their education here. There's no guarantee that they can get a job after that in this country, even though they've been trained here. They don't have access to the same sets of healthcare and other social security protections that Canadians have access to, but they're coming here and paying tens and tens of thousands of dollars more than domestic students for the same equivalent education. So we must, this is absolutely essential that we have this discussion about the way that we treat international students and the way that these international students are actually subsidizing our domestic students because of the underfunding from the system. And I'll remind everybody that there was once upon a time when the federal government actually participated in the regular funding of post-secondary education in Canada. And we can definitely go back to that model. And it's something New Democrats will work to over the course of the next few years. Thank you so much for the question, Cashton.
All right, thank you so much. Next, we're going to have Marci. Marci Ien.
Hi, Diane. Just unmuting. Thank you so much. And Cashton, thank you so much for the question. We are working so very hard to make post-secondary education more affordable for students. And so we have waived interest payments for students. A re-elected Liberal government would waive the interest payments completely. Right now, they are due to end. We would waive them completely. Also doubling student grants, which is really, really important. The Canada Summer Jobs Program, I was so pleased to be able to go through the riding, go through Toronto Centre this past summer and see the dozens and dozens of our program working at the businesses throughout Toronto Centre and doing so well. And that work experience, is important. That work experience is experience that will make sure that, you know, they qualify for jobs later, give them the connections that they need in the community. It's such an important learning experience, and more than 750 students got that experience this summer alone. I am an alumni of Ryerson, now ex-university, and while there created a scholarship to help students for this very reason, to help support students in post-secondary education. So it is top of mind for me. Thanks so much, Cashton and Diane.
Awesome. Up next, Ryan Lester.
Thank you so much for the question. I think, you know, when I reflect on it, the reason that we're talking about how difficult it is to pay for post-secondary education is because people don't have any money left at the end of the month after paying for all of the expenses. So the cost of everything is going up. That's what really is at the core of this problem. Grocery bills are up 5%, gas prices are skyrocketing. Inflation is at the highest level that it has been in 20 years, and it's only going up. Families are struggling to make ends meet. Discussion about having anything left over for anything other than the essentials just isn't the conversation happening around the kitchen table. Fiscal responsibility is important to Canadians. It simply cannot just be ignored. Justin Trudeau's budget was a massive letdown for our country. Unemployed Canadians hoping to see a plan to create new jobs and economic opportunities for their families are feeling let down. Workers who have had their wages cut and hours slashed, hoping to see a plan to reopen the economy, are also feeling let down. Families that can't afford more taxes are struggling to save even more money for their children's education or to buy a home, as we've talked about earlier tonight. So Canadians can be confident that Canada's recovery plan, Conservatives will secure the future by recovering millions of jobs and introducing policies that result in better wages and help struggling small businesses get back on your feet. Once we have all of the benefits of the Canada Recovery Plan in place, people will have more money to do the things like post-education. Thank you.
All right, and to round it out, Annamie Paul.
Thank you so much. And first, let's just acknowledge that education is a human right. It's recognized as a human right by our country, by the United Nations, and we're not treating it as a human right here. We know, and it was a wonderful question. We know that education now, in terms of getting a job, in terms of being civically engaged, requires at least 2 to 4 years of post-secondary education for most people, but we haven't changed anything in recognition of that. We're still treating it almost like this private good that you can opt in and opt out of, and it doesn't really make a difference if you have it or you don't. How else could we explain a country as wealthy as ours not making sure that every single person has access to that education? This is another one of these areas where there was inequalities before the pandemic, and they have only increased during the pandemic. We had the average student graduating with $28,000 of debt. And those students, of course, are the poor, marginalized students. You don't graduate with that much debt if someone else is paying for your education. And now we know that they're going to graduate with even more. And Statistics Canada is starting to talk about those students as the lost generation. So this is an emergency, and it's something that we should all be concerned about because these students are our future. So we have said very clearly for many years now that we should join countries like Denmark and France and Germany and Finland and all the other wealthy economies that have free post-secondary education, free. And those that have debt that the federal government is holding, I mean, the federal government has become a loan shark now. They need to abolish that debt. They should forgive that debt. There's no reason they can't. This is the way that we reduce inequality. This is the way that we ensure that students can recover from the pandemic. And it's the way we secure their future and the future of our country. It's something that is well overdue.
All right, thank you so much. And now I'm going to pass it back to my co-host.
Yes, let me go up. All right, so there was a question here about global vaccine inequity. I'll just read it out. So We've learned from this pandemic that the lives of all of us in this world are deeply interconnected. Many people in Toronto Centre and across Canada have loved ones living in countries directly impacted by global vaccine inequity. Public health experts have warned us that when COVID is still spreading in places like Indonesia and Somalia, it means higher likelihood of it mutating into much more dangerous variants. What is your plan to address global vaccine inequity? And we will start with Marci Ien for 2 minutes.
Thanks so much, Sebastian. Thank you so much for the question, because we are in a pandemic. These past 19 months have been hard for everybody, but our government responded. And I want to be clear about that. I am the only person here that actually sat, albeit virtually, in the House of Commons during that time, and watched time and time again as other parties said, hey, you're not moving quick enough. Hey, you're never going to get this vaccine. Hey, it's going to be 30 years till you do. And I, along with my colleagues, Anita Anand, Patty Haidu, others who led the charge on this, got it done. And we're not there yet, but we're farther along than many thought we would be. We are amongst the highest in the world when it comes to our vaccine program and the number of vaccinated Canadians. And that's something I'm very, very proud of. We are also compassionate. I mentioned at the beginning of our time together that my parents emigrated from Trinidad some 60 years ago. And our government has sent vaccines to Trinidad and to other countries, because you're absolutely right. Until we are all vaccinated, we're all in jeopardy. Thanks so much for the question.
Thank you for that answer. And by the way, we have like a semi-connection, because if you're from Trinidad, I'm from Venezuela, so we're kind of like neighbors.
Oh my gosh, yes, you're more
actually
than neighbors.
I'm from the coast of Venezuela too. So my all my cousins went to high school in Trinidad.
Oh my gosh, it's a huge connection. I spent time in Caracas.
Oh, I love that.
Anyway, we'll talk after.
I was born in Caracas. Yes, you know how it goes. Small world.
Small world.
And next, I'll go with Ryan Lester for 2 minutes for the same question around global vaccine inequity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think what we want to say here and emphasize is that we must never again be caught as unprepared as we were when COVID hit last year. And that much, I think, has become painfully obvious. Canada's Conservatives will make our country more resilient, reduce our reliance on foreign countries like China, and take seriously our responsibility to protect the health of all Canadians. Vaccines are the most important tool in the fight against COVID-19, and I want to encourage every Canadian who is eligible to get one. You know, when COVID-19 hit, as I mentioned, the Liberal government just wasn't ready and caught unprepared. They made bad decisions that cost the lives of Canadians and crippled our economy. We all remember daily press briefings that were a little bit of an hour short, an hour late and $1 short. Canada's Conservatives will ensure that the country is ready to face future pandemics. Our goal is simple when it comes to this. Be prepared to take rapid action so that we protect the health of Canadians while avoiding long-term impacts on the economy and on mental health. So Canada Emergency Preparedness Plan will include things like partnering with pharmaceutical companies to increase the production of critical medicines and active pharmaceutical ingredients here in Canada. And we want to work with the United States to strengthen the North American supply chain for pharmaceuticals to reduce our shared reliance on imports. And we also want to assign ultimate responsibility for the Public Health Agency of Canada to a qualified physician. So, you know, we're going to overhaul some of Canada's pandemic plan. We want to be sure that we have a plan in place for the next pandemic. And we don't want to be caught kind of making it up as we go along and making plans and commitments on the backs of a napkin. So lastly, just to emphasize one more time that vaccines are the most important tool in the fight against COVID-19. And I really would like to encourage anyone who is able to get one to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I believe the next person up is, is Annamie. So 2 minutes about global vaccine inequity, especially, and how the vaccine supply abroad affects us in Canada, and how you want to tackle that in Parliament.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the question, and thank you for reminding us of what the question actually was, because it's important to answer that. And it's true, I don't have a seat in Parliament, but as the leader of a national party, I did work very hard to draw international attention, because there were articles in the United States and in Europe that quoted some of my press conferences about COVAX and Canada's response. And one of the things that I did say was to remember that we here in Canada, many of us, other than our First Nations, are immigrants, that many of us are new Canadians. We have people that we care about in other countries. We have people that we are worried about beyond our own borders. And so when Canada chose to take vaccines from the one supply that had been reserved, mostly reserved for low income and middle income countries, that was something that impacted people in Canada, not only because of the loved ones that we have abroad, but also because we know that if we do not get people vaccinated abroad, that we run the risk of being back where we started when the virus mutates, and we don't have a vaccine to prevent that. We used to be global leaders on these things. We used to understand that we were part of an international community of neighbors, and that we're not just going to hoard things for ourselves and leave others to suffer, that we are going to share. When the World Health Organization made the call to us to help with vaccines, we did not respond. When the Global Alliance on Vaccination and Immunization made the response, we didn't respond. And so we've got to do better, not only for the sake of those abroad, and that should be enough, but also for our sake here at home. And that is going to require different leadership going forward.
Thank you for that answer and keeping the focus on the interconnectedness of the world around us. So I'm going to round it off with Brian Chang for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much for the question. So I just want everyone to go back a few months to what the vaccine inequity actually looked like within our own community. Depending on what postal code you were in, when we started the vaccination program here in Toronto Centre, it meant whether you were able to get a vaccination or not. And where I live in the village, just on the edge of the village, our postal code was excluded. It was never considered a hotspot, even though directly across the street, if you were to cross Jarvis, you would suddenly be in a hotspot. If you were to cross south of Dundas, you were suddenly in another hotspot. So the rollout here was not even. There were problems with racialized communities not having access to the vaccines, where the pharmacies were that were getting access to vaccines. What this looks like globally is this is going on right now in the global south, and my family in Jamaica are actually facing this reality now, where the flow of vaccines is actually making things really challenging. And here in Canada, many of us have the option to go get vaccinated, and absolutely you should. But in places like Jamaica, where there's still a lockdown, people are only starting to get public access to vaccines in just the last few weeks. So there are so many places around the world in which we have to recognize that they are so much further behind than we are. And that's simply not okay, because everything just can't be hunky-dory in Canada, because we have families, we have loved ones, we have connections, we have trade, we have travel, we have supports and international commitments to these communities right around the world. And we are all connected. New Democrats are talking about using the TRIPS waiver to actually make sure that the manufacture of these biomedical products and vaccines can happen domestically in countries around the world. We're also talking about reestablishing and building our capacity to do that work here. When it comes to PPE, when it comes to vaccines, when it comes to biomedical products, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, not be reliant on other countries to do this work. Canada can step up, and we can. We're a very wealthy country. We can do it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for that answer, Brian. So I'm going to pass it off to Dime, who's going to ask the next question.
Yeah, so for our next question, I would like to call on Gail Lynch, who had a question.
Hello, and good afternoon, everybody. So, for me, this is, I think there are three questions here, or three things that this election is about for me. And that first is the policies that create and enhance systemic issues. The second is housing. And the question I have is around housing, because I keep hearing you have a plan, you have a plan. Thank you for having a plan. What is it? How will you build this? Is it TCHC? Because that now leads us back to issue number one, systemic issues, right? If I make more than X amount, I lose my housing, and it's not a big amount. How will you create sustainable employment? Those are my questions. And then the other around systemic issues is, when we talk about the Canadian government, right, we've done apologies to the Indigenous people, as we should. We've done apologies to the Chinese Canadians, as we should. We've done to Japanese Canadians, to the LGBTQ community. What about my people? What about the Black people? We had a Black candidates debate last night, or session like this one. 300 Black people on the call. I mean, and we didn't, for the two Black leaders here, we didn't have you on that call, and that was missing for me. So my questions are really, well, how will you build this housing? How are we going to create sustainable employment? And are you calling for reparations? If so, when? I know there was a call put out in 2018 in the Senate, nothing more since then. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was three questions. So I was wondering, Gail, if you could specify with one.
What we've done in the past is we've allowed the candidates to answer however they wish to, and
that works.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to start with Ryan Lester.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the question. All three are good. I'm going to focus in on jobs and the economy, and talk a little bit about the Canada Job Surge Plan. So we all know that over the course of the pandemic, millions of Canadians lost their jobs, with women accounting for more than half of year-over-year employment losses. The tourism and hospitality sectors were among the hardest hit, as well as part-time and temporary workers. So to get our economy back on track, Canada's recovery plan will recover the million jobs lost in the sectors hardest hit by the pandemic, and get as many people back to work in good jobs in every part of Canada, in every sector, as quickly as possible. Once the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy ends, Canada's Conservatives will introduce the Canada Job Surge Plan to get Canadians back to work. An O'Toole government will pay at least 25% of the salary of new hires for 6 months after the CEWS expires. And I think that's a good concrete plan. To help those who have been unemployed long-term, our plan will cover up to 50% of the salary for those who have been unemployed for 6 months or more. The Liberals, they don't have a plan to get Canadians back to work. Even before the pandemic, they had given us the worst economic landscape since the Great Depression. So you'll remember, and I know that you'll take some comfort in knowing that Canada's Conservatives got us out of the last recession, and will get our country out of this one too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Annamie Paul.
Thank you, Gail, and nice to see you on your mocktails there. I wasn't invited to that. I don't know what happened, but I promise you that had I been invited to that conversation yesterday, I would have come. So please let the organizers know that, and I hope to be at that next conversation, because they are very important, and I always do my best to show up for those. In terms of jobs, in some ways we've been talking about that already tonight in the different topics. These things are all connected. One of the things that we've learned throughout the pandemic is how interconnected things are. Women, in particular, women can't go to work if they don't have adequate childcare for their children at home. If people don't have adequate housing to live in, and there's 6 people in 800 square feet, then it's hard for them to hold down a job. It's hard for someone who's using drugs if they don't have a safe supply, or again, supportive housing to live in, to be able to get trained for a job. So these things are all connected, and it's time that we start looking at these things as connected and get to the root causes of things. So if we're looking at how are we going to create the jobs of the future, first, we haven't talked about the climate a lot tonight, Gail, but when we talk about a green recovery and creating a green economy, it's being described, again, in a nonpartisan way, across party lines, as the greatest economic opportunity of our lifetimes. So that is something that will create jobs in the short term and the long term. But if we want to prepare people for the jobs of the future, then of course we shouldn't be charging them so much money to go and get an education and to go and get training. Of course, they need to have somewhere safe and comfortable to live. Of course, they need to have childcare and to be able to meet the daily expenses of life. So, again, let's send people to Ottawa that understand that and are ready to complete the full social safety net and ensure a life of dignity for everyone from the first day to the last.
Thank you so much. Up next, we have NDP candidate Brian Chang.
Thanks for the question, Gail. So the same like any of these questions that I'm providing today, this is the start of a conversation. It's not the end of the conversation. So absolutely, let's continue to have these. And maybe I'll come down to the bazaar and we can have some soul brew together and chat more about this, Gail. I'm absolutely committed to these. When it comes to what New Democrats bring to the table, is this idea of justice in policy. And as we're bringing this forward, justice to disrupt existing systems, justice to build new systems, justice to make sure that this is part of the work that we're constantly doing. When it comes to having discussions about racial justice, if reparations absolutely must be part of that conversation. And I will happily speak as an ally on that alongside the Black community as they're pushing for that. In terms of housing, housing is a right. So what does housing look like if we don't put forward? You've heard plans from the other parties tonight actually that are about home ownership. Remember, our very first question that we had was actually about renters and what we're going to do to help people who rent, because housing doesn't mean home ownership. They're two very different things. We must focus on housing, purpose-built rentals, co-ops, nonprofit housing, social housing, community housing, rent geared to income, below market rent. We can do all of this. Shelters, rehab spots, long-term care homes. This is all part of New Democrat plans. And in terms of the last piece that you had around employment, I want you to think of a world that New Democrats are trying to build, where all of the things that you rely on, from extended healthcare to travel insurance to making sure that you have access to dental care and eye care and hearing care and vision care and medication, that's no longer tied to your employment. What does this world look like, this just world in the future, in which these are already provided by the government, in which you already have access to all of these benefits, which means that you no longer have to be stuck in work that's not treating you well, that you don't have to injure yourself constantly by being at work and having to deal with the lack of paid sick leave. What we want is a just world for workers, a just world where you have access to housing, and a just world where racial justice is key to the policies that we're putting forward. So thank you so much for the question, Gail.
Awesome, thank you so much. And for this next question, I'm gonna pass it back to my co-host, Sebastian.
Yes. So thank you for those three questions, Gail. And to wrap it up, we're going to do kind of like a bonus question in which candidates actually have just 1 minute to make an answer, so we could get like a quick little kind of popcorn style. So the question is going to be from Kausar, who I saw had their hand up earlier. So I'm going to invite them to, oh, we didn't hear from Marci on the last question, right?
Goodness. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
No, don't worry about it. I was just
sorry.
going to include it, and don't even worry. I was just going to include it in the next response. So however you want to do it. No, don't worry. You guys
she gets extra time.
Yeah.
Marci, let's go. Yeah. And just to the other candidates, because we're doing one last bonus round question from an elder from St. Jamestown, we will shorten your closing by 1 minute. So it's 2-minute closings, just as an FYI, so you can plan. Go ahead, Marci.
Okay, thank you so much. And Gail, thank you so much for the question. I want to deal with the systemic issue, the systemic aspect of it. If there is a problem, you've got to name it in order to find a solution. And the Liberal government did just that, recognized anti-Black racism, recognized systemic issues, called it what it was, and that is important. When I became the Member of Parliament for Toronto Centre, I became the first Black woman, the first woman of color to do that. Why does that matter? Because lived experience matters. And it means that my voice at the table is talking from experience, what I've lived, what I've been through. Not somebody saying, well, I had a friend and this happened to them. It's no, this is what happened to me last week. This is what happened in my youth. And at the beginning of this, when I was recruited, I will say, to possibly run in this election, run for the party, I really asked the question, do you know who I am and what I've been saying throughout my whole career? Because what I've been saying is talking about my story, talking about the systemic racism that I encountered, family, friends, the trauma, all of that, and fighting against it and finding solutions for it. And I said, listen, that's the voice that I had. It's the voice that I'm going to maintain. It's the voice that sometimes garnered me death threats on social media, but I haven't changed and won't change. But as I say, and as I started this with, you've got to name the problem. You've got to name it. And we did that. And it's the reason that I'm proud to stand here and be a part of the Liberal Party, or sit here, as it were.
Thank you for that. So now we're going to go into the quick round bonus question, and we'll just do it by the ABCD order, which was Annamie, Brian, Marci, and Ryan. So the question, I'm gonna let Shaheen Kausar have the floor. So go ahead, you have 1 minute to ask your question.
Okay, thank you so much for providing me the time, and very nice to have you here. I'm not going to saying too much. So my question is, do you believe in equal rights for migrants? If you do, will you ensure the next government provides full and permanent immigration status for all? In that case, they will be able to get all the benefits what the regular citizen or other people are getting.
Thank you so much for that question, Shaheen. Status for all is overdue. So I am going to let Annamie have 1 minute to answer that question. Floor is yours.
Thank you for the question, and the short answer is yes. And again, we shouldn't have needed the pandemic to remind us of the value of migrant workers, for instance, and to highlight how there has been for a very long time a second-class status. The programs that were introduced in order to create a pathway for migrants, we've heard very clearly from migrant associations that they're not adequate, that they're too bureaucratic, and that they leave too many people out. We have a major shortage of labor in this country in many different areas. If we're going to welcome people into Canada, then we have to truly welcome them. We have to give them a pathway towards citizenship, and we have to ensure that when they are here, they are treated in exactly the same way as citizens are. It's the least of things, and certainly helps our society to remain more cohesive. And we absolutely support that.
Thank you for that. So next up, Brian Chang.
Thank you so much for the question, Shaheen. So the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Project, as well as the Living Caregiver Project, which is now in a new pilot program, these are discriminatory ways in which the Canadian government takes people from other countries, brings them here, makes them and exploits them for their labor, gives them no credible path to citizenship, and absolutely ruins the lives of these people who want to build a life here in Canada. Jamaica is the country that Canada first signed its very first agreement with for the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program. And now this has become essential. There is no way for us to feed Canadians without these workers. So we absolutely need to, this is not a temporary program anymore. It was originally introduced as a temporary program. It used to be called a Temporary Foreign Workers Program. We need to actually work to recognize that these are absolutely essential parts of the Canadian system, actually provide livable, adequate situations for them, and ensure that they're not coming here and suffering so that we can have food on our table. So absolutely, I will work for that. It is a federal responsibility, and I will be an ally alongside migrants. Status for all. Thank you.
Thank you. So next up will be Marci Ien for 1 minute.
Thanks so much, Sebastian. I can't tell you what a privilege it has been in the last 10 months to help people along the journey to permanent residency. And that is something that our office has worked hard on. And it really is, it's amazing. You know, just today, I was in St. Jamestown and I was talking to a man from Sri Lanka, and he had his 2 kids with him and literally was making me cry because he was crying, and just so thankful and so grateful that he was here, that he was able to get work here, that he was able to provide for his family, for his kids. His kids are in school. I shared with him that I, as a journalist, had gone to Sri Lanka, and so we had that in common. And it's amazing. There are hundreds of stories like that. And I really, not only was our office helping with those journeys, but I made sure I wanted to talk to every single one. Those conversations were long and they were lengthy, just to see how they were doing, double checking months later to see how they were faring. And so our country is better when it welcomes people the way my parents were welcomed. And thank you.
Thank you for wrapping it up. And then lastly will be Ryan Lester to round it out.
Thank you very much. Those who want to come to Canada deserve a plan that provides them with clarity and a process that treats them with dignity, compassion, and respect. But I'm going to challenge the Liberal government's record a little bit on this one here. When it comes to immigration, the people's experience is one of mismanagement and years-long backlogs. I've heard that people are saying the Liberals have failed to effectively manage the immigration system, especially during this pandemic. You know, so Justin Trudeau is failing to put forward a plan that ensures a fair, orderly, and compassionate immigration process during this pandemic. And that has had real consequences for those hoping to call Canada home. Conservatives have heard from countless families affected by this Liberal government's poor management on this file, and the failure to provide Canadians and their loved ones with clarity and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I think it's going to be time for the closing statement. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Dai, and then the candidates will close out.
Yeah, so we are going to start off with our closing statements. Ryan Lester, you can go first.
Thank you. So for me, this election is how we get Canada back on its feet and rebuild our economy. And like you, promises made in campaigns matter to me. Erin O'Toole and Canada's Conservatives, in my opinion, are the only alternative to secure the future, restore competence, transparency, and accountability to government, and ensure that Canada is never unprepared for a crisis again. So with the Conservatives, you get Canada's recovery plan to secure jobs, health, and Canada's economic future. We will secure jobs by recovering every one of the 1 million jobs lost during the pandemic within 1 year. We will secure accountability by enacting new anti-corruption laws to clean up the mess in Ottawa. We will secure mental health through our Canada Mental Health Action Plan. And we will secure our country by creating a stockpile of essential products and building the capacity to manufacture vaccines at home. Lastly, we will secure Canada's economy by balancing the budget over the next decade. There is a simple choice. I will focus relentlessly on jobs, wages, and getting Canada's economy and finances back on track as quickly as possible. Or the alternative is the inaction we've seen from the Liberals who want unaffordable spending commitments that would leave Canada with unsustainable levels of debt and unemployment. So I invite everyone to learn more about my lived experience and our plan for Canada's recovery at ryanlester.ca. It's been great chatting with everyone here tonight, and I have enjoyed listening and participating in this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Marci Ien, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Diane, and I won't take the entire 2 minutes. Thank you and Sebastian, first and foremost, for doing such an excellent job I've enjoyed the questions. I've loved being here. I will say that all politics are local politics. So for me, it's about grassroots. It's about being a part of the community. It's about connecting with the community. It's about listening. It's about taking action. In the last 10 months as MP, we did that, and asking for a mandate to continue because there is lots more work to be done. We've heard the issues. We know the issues. Housing, mental health, youth, mentorship is huge for me. Reconciliation. We haven't talked a lot about that tonight. That is first and foremost. And as someone said to me just the other day, as I knocked on a door, Marci, if we don't get that right, then nothing else matters. And I tend to agree. Thank you for your questions again and for the opportunity to chat tonight.
So much. We love having you here. Brian Chang.
Thanks so much. And thanks to everybody for tonight. The questions are fantastic, and hearing directly from people in the community is so important. And this is what I've been doing for months. It's what I've been doing since 2019, knocking on doors, talking to people, showing up, being present, whether it's helping seniors access vaccines and food in St. Lawrence Market, to whether it's delivering food packages to seniors at 650 Parliament. I'm there, I've shown up, and I will continue to show up for our communities time and time again, because that's what we need. We need representatives who will show up for our community, who have done the work and will continue to do that work. I'm also thinking about, and this election, I want you to think about 2031. What does it look like 10 years from now? And one thing that is constantly top of mind for me is one of my best friends, who I found out earlier this year has actually drained all of her savings, including all of her retirement. She has a very good job and she has health benefits that are covered by that. She had to drain all of her retirement savings because she has to pay for a drug that's not covered by OHIP. And that drug is simply so expensive that she's had to drain all of her savings. And that's simply unacceptable. She needs this drug in order to walk, in order to function, in order to go to work, in order to make money. And that's simply wrong that we're in such a wealthy country like Canada, and we can't meet the needs of people like my best friend. And there are so many ways in which the government isn't meeting your needs right now. Think about the lack of affordable housing. And I mean a safe place to call home. There should be a place for all of us to call home. There should be a safe place for your children to call home. There should be a safe place for our elders to call home, our Indigenous communities, people in parks. There should be safe spaces for all of us. We were not meeting the needs of our communities. And that's why we must implement the work and do the work so that 2031, we're not having these same discussions. So many of the reasons why I'm running again in 2021 is because these were the issues in 2019. These were the issues in 2015. And they continue to be an issue to this day. And this is a chance for you as voters to say, no, we want change. We fundamentally need to have a different 2031. And that work starts today. So I would love your support. Visit brianchang.ca. Let me know what your questions are. Reach out on social media. I'm here for you. I want to talk to you. And let's work together to make Toronto Centre a prosperous, happy place for us all. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And to round it out once again, Annamie Paul.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having organized this event. It's so nice to see you all, even if I'm not physically there right now. And, hopefully the next time there's an event like this, it will be in person, because we have finally laid this pandemic to rest, which has been so difficult on the community, much more so than many other parts of the city and parts of the country. I would just say that I would notice that my timer is not okay. I don't want to go over. So I would just say as a reflection to all of you, and something that I've said before, which is just that we can't keep heading down the same road in the same direction and hope to arrive at a new destination. And all of you here, those of you that I have spoken to, even those of you who I haven't, I suspect understand that the destination that Toronto Centre has been heading to for a long time is not the one that it wants to keep heading towards. And that is despite the efforts of an incredibly generous community. This is the most civic-minded, generous, thoughtful community that I have ever encountered. When people need help, people in the community rally together. That being said, Toronto Centre needs a champion in Ottawa that is going to be its partner, helping to find the resources to support the community. It is doing all that it can. It just needs some help. We need some help. And that is where your representative comes in. And we have been trying to demonstrate that in real time not outside of the election cycle, showing up to help with food drives, helping to get groceries for seniors, helping to get laptops for people who need them, helping to get people rehoused. That's what real help looks like. And then you combine that with the big issues: guaranteed livable income, universal pharmacare, universal post-secondary education, the things that you need for a life of dignity. And that is really a winning solution. I don't want any of you to believe for a second that Canada does not have everything that it needs in order to be a global leader on all of these things. We do. And if other countries have done it, so can we. We just have to have the will to do it, and we have to be willing to work together. I believe every candidate here cares about our community. I believe that we need to work together. Cooperation is the key, and I hope that you'll put your trust in me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Those were your candidates.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everybody, and particularly Dai and Sebastian. That was really phenomenal. And thank you so much for being a part of this. And thank you as well to the candidates for participating in that. Such great questions. This is one of the first times that we've taken the majority of our questions from the floor. Once again, Regent Park, Corktown, and St. Jamestown, you have proven that you are a phenomenal audience and that it's really fun to work with you to host these events. So thank you so much.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out all of our social media platforms. For more information, check out our website.
Thank you.